My dear brothers and sisters, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. I have with me a young budding bright psychologist, Asmita Bijlani, who is currently doing her master's in psychology from the Jamia Millia University in New Delhi. She told me the other day that she has been asked to read Sri Aurobindo's psychology or his teachings related to psychology for an assignment. To a disciple of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, this was music to my ears, and I'm sure if a bright young person has been studying Sri Aurobindo for the last so many days, she would come up with some original ideas or some thoughts that have crossed her mind, which may be useful for all of us. So Asmita, would you like to share something with us based on your readings in the last few days?
Yes, actually, a lot of things came to my mind as somebody who was reading Sri Aurobindo's thoughts for the first time. And while trying to understand them, I could also connect it to what I've already studied as a student of psychology, the major theories that we have explored in our course. So I have seen that a lot of concepts that Sri Aurobindo mentions have been explored by theories such as the humanistic and existential theories, and even by Carl Jung, where he talks extensively about the unconscious mind. And even he believed that there is a spiritual domain to life. So somewhere I feel that the West has also incorporated these ideas, but very briefly, not as much as in depth as Sri Aurobindo has explored them. And while these theories have contributed immensely to psychology, I think this thought that Sri Aurobindo brings to us answers certain questions that may have been left unanswered by these theories.
Yes, these are very interesting ideas. And as you were speaking, what crossed my mind was that basically psychology is trying to understand human nature or the human mind. And that is the same everywhere. There are just different ways of looking at it, approaching it, and the different degrees of depth to which one can go while studying this. And in fact, Carl Jung was one of those who gave a great prominence to something which we may call the spiritual view of psychology. In the recent times, he was one of those important major psychologists who did that. And in fact, the center that Carl Jung talked about corresponds very closely to what Sri Aurobindo has called the psychic being. That is the dynamic aspect of the soul that on one hand helps us make the best and authentic choices in life. On the other hand, it also helps us access knowledge which is not ordinarily available to the mind, and it also helps us in self-exceeding, that is, transcending several limits, or rather several limitations which we associate with human beings. So that is the function of the psychic being, and there's quite a bit of close correspondence between this, as you can see, and what Carl Jung has called the center. And in fact, if modern psychology had continued on the same lines as Carl Jung had put it, by now, probably Western psychology and Indian psychology would have converged completely. But that didn't happen because after that, Western psychology drifted in another direction in order to justify itself as or qualify itself as a science. Because then, the scientific enterprise was so successful, particularly in the Western world, that it became a matter of prestige for any subject of study to qualify as a science. And if psychology had to qualify as a science, it had to fit within the framework of science. And therefore, the first thing it had to get rid of was the soul. And when it did that, it became the study of just the mind. Because the mind, is something superficial. The soul is much deeper. And if you actually go to the roots of the word psychology, as you would have read in your psychology books perhaps also, even today, they say that it comes from two words, psyche and logos. And psyche means the soul. So it was study of the soul. Yeah. But then the subject of psychology itself got rid of the soul. It retained the name psychology, but it got rid of the soul and it became just study of the mind. And after that, further to qualify even more as a science, it got rid of even the mind and it became the science of behavior. Because behavior can be studied in a scientific way much more easily than even the mind. Mind is also very subjective. But behavior can be studied in terms of questionnaires which were constructed. These questionnaires can be scored. You get numerical data which can be analyzed statistically as in any other science. And so psychology could qualify as a science. But then in order to qualify as a science, it underwent this voluntary amputation. It got rid of some essential aspects of its own sort of body. And this was also perhaps with a purpose, because everything happens as a result of the divine will, and everything has a purpose. The purpose perhaps was that this particular narrow area of psychology, which can be studied through questionnaires, after all that is also a part of psychology, would not have developed without that degree of concentrated attention on just those aspects for a few decades. But then as those decades passed, gradually the limitations of this approach were realized, and then modern psychology started expanding with things like positivist philosophy and transpersonal psychology. These were things which broadened its limits, which took it beyond,
Yes.
and once again started moving in the same direction. Now coming back to Sri Aurobindo, he has sort of looked at everything, but including the human mind, in terms of what is on the surface and what is hidden. So some parts of the mind are on the surface. We can identify with those easily, and broadly we divide them into two: the feeling part and the thinking part, the emotional part of the being and the intellect. So these are on the surface. These we can easily identify with. But there's a lot that is hidden, which is not on the surface. This we may call is the subconscious. And within this subconscious, there are further two aspects. One is what represents the past. That is, in terms of evolution, what has already evolved, but now is not on the surface, but it can be unearthed and comes out from time to time. So that's what we say, that was there in the subconscious, now it is showing up. But the other aspect of the subconscious, which can also show up from time to time, is what has not yet evolved, which deals with evolution in the future. And this, Sri Aurobindo has called the subliminal part of the mind. So the subconscious itself, that is not what is not conscious on the surface, itself has two aspects: that which has already evolved but is now no longer very prominent in human beings, and that which is yet to evolve in the human beings of the future, or a new race that may supersede the human beings. So that is where those aspects will show. But they keep showing up in human beings from time to time. They may show only in a small number, like our rishis and mystics and the sages and saints. Those are the aspects which they end up expressing, and that is how they acquire those abilities to perceive things which are not ordinarily within the reach of the ordinary intellect. So they are able to access those regions which are yet to evolve. But what is now available, what level of consciousness is now available to only a select few, and for the rest it remains at the subconscious level. With further evolution, it could become the norm. So this part, which is yet to evolve, is what is the subliminal mind. So that's how Sri Aurobindo has looked at the mind. If that helps you become a little more clear, and if it corresponds to what you have been reading during the last few days, you might have some comment or further question to ask.
Yes, that definitely does match up to what has been some of the gaps in the literature that we have been studying so far. And I feel that somewhere we should be integrating. It's good that we are going back to what psychology left behind in its journey. So I think that now is a good time for the discipline to integrate these two parts and develop a more holistic perspective.
That's right. The time is ripe for a synthesis.
Yeah.
Okay, Smita, thank you. And if you have any more questions, we'll meet again.
Sure. Thank you so much.